boy. Okay, should be this one. Yeah. Okay. So the intent for this meeting is to try to finalize the risk matrix threshold that could be plug, play, adjust for the utilities. And yeah, that's the main goal. And the second goal was to look into the proposed workflow, same thing, to kind of adjust, etc., whatever could be plug and play for a risk management process in a company. So starting with the threshold. So there was a little bit of kind of thinking from you guys, looking at those documents that were provided to you, and see if you had some ideas, suggestions on how probability and impact could be defined, that could be applicable across the boards or adjusted to your company. Jessica and Kathleen, and I'm sorry, I'm in full screen, so I don't know if somebody else is joining, so please let me know.
Yeah, we'll let you know, and Jody is just coming in right now.
Okay, good. Good morning, Jody.
Good morning, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Good.
So, yeah, I was mentioning the first objective of this meeting is to align and seek some feedback, ideas on how the risk matrix threshold could look like, that the utilities could use. So please, Kathleen, Jessica, and Jody, jump in. I'm going to take some notes directly in the file that I will send afterwards, so you can maybe design it the way you want according to UAIM charter. So, yeah.
Do you mind if I just jump in?
Please.
Okay, so on our probability, on the very unlikely, cumulative causes are necessary to trigger the event. So, you know, it's not usually one thing that happens. It's usually two or more things that would cause the risk event. I'm trying to think of an example, like, you know, it's not just a storm, but the storm goes out. You have a flood and a wind, for example, or, you know, more than one. That's a indicator of a very unlikely.
So Kathleen, do you, just like you said, do you have like a short, almost definition of what these are? I mean, that could be a, you know, desirable to put in something, Elaine, that says what very unlikely or possible or likely. Just a short, doesn't even have to be a complete sentence, but you mentioned a couple things, Kathleen, for very unlikely.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were asking, Helen.
Actually, I was asking what would be your views with regards to what it means, what is the definition of very unlikely, etc., in terms of percentage, probability of occurrence. So here we have very unlikely means that there's 5% or less chances that this risk might occur.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So maybe that's adequate. But, you know, if not, you could stick in what, you know, Jody, I don't know if you have, for example, you have different terms maybe, but, you know, do you have definitions on the probability scale?
I mean, we add frequency with the probability. So we align our and slightly different terminology for 1 through 5, but let's say a rare occurrence would be less than 2%, and we say that's less than once every 50 years. So we try to put like a frequency time frame on that as well, where our 5 near certain, very likely, that's greater than 90% in our framework, and the frequency would be at least once every year or 2.
Okay, and how about risk that have an occurrence that's not tied to a frequency? For example, risk that assets are pushed to their limits, or risk that the expertise and competencies in a company could be challenging. That's not directly relatable to a frequency. So how would you manage that, Jody?
I think it's based upon the data that you have that you're evaluating. That's why we added, a percentage. If we understand what the percentage likely of failure is, and we have good data on that, we would use the percentage scale. If we don't have very good percentage and we're looking at it more from a frequency standpoint, so it's not, we don't have to have both of them.
Okay.
Is what I'm saying, to call it a 2 or a 3. It is based upon the available data related to the probability.
Okay. So you say rare for you is 2% or less. Less rare. How would you call it in your matrix?
I can. Do you want me to share it, or do you want me to report it out here?
If you can say it so I can type it next to it.
So my 2 is called unlikely.
Okay.
And that's 2 to 10%.
Okay.
3 is possible, 11 to 20%. And again, this is our first cut. And when I'm looking at this, the likely one is a very broad range. And so, my scale may need to change as well. And so I'm looking for input here, but likely is 21% to 90%.
Okay.
And then near certain is greater than 90.
Okay.
And then my frequency, if you want to include that in here, I don't know if you want to or not. So for 1, it's less than once every 50 years. 2 is once every 10 to 50 years.
Hang on, I'm typing not so fast.
Okay.
So you say for unlikely is?
Unlikely is 10 to 50, once every 10 to 50 years.
Okay.
And possible is once every 5 to 10 years.
5 to 10 years, right?
And then likely would be once every 1 to 5 years. And near certain is at least once every 1 to 2 years. Some overlap there, but.
Okay. Thanks for that, Jody. Yeah. And Kathleen and Jessica, how does it look like in your company?
So we don't use, we have more of a qualitative where, like I said, the very unlikely is cumulative causes are necessary.
Okay.
And we just use a 1 through 1, 2, 3, not the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
So cumulative causes and the 3, which you have, it's possible. We say it's a standalone event, a possible event, but and then the very Very likely is it's happened before. We have experience of the event previously.
Okay. Okay. And Jessica, what do you have in your company?
We aren't really defining that very well, so
Okay.
I would probably defer to you guys. What you have.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, there's no major discrepancy in some, I mean,
Right.
again, this is really, I mean, we can talk forever. There's no truth or no truth here. So maybe what I could suggest is, and I really do not mind at all, is keeping Jody's one, because that might be useful for you guys, specifically in asset management and maybe in engineering when you go to the operational and tactic risk management, and keeping less than 2%, unlikely, blah, blah, blah. The only point I would kind of debate here is around the 90%. Why? Because again, according to some accounting rules, when it is 80% probability or more, the accounting rules impose that you account for it in your budget or in your forecast, depending on what you're talking about. So that is the threshold. I would say, for example, if you are on a project and your project is $300 million and you have a risk with an 80% chance of probability of materializing and let's say an impact of $10 million, you will have to put those $10 million as a forecast expense on your project, or you would have to clearly show that you have accounted for it in your project contingencies. So that's the only point I would kind of debate in that.
Jessica has her hand up, and then I have a comment, a suggestion. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to share. I was looking for it, but the probability calculation that we used when we did our risk and resiliency assessment this past year matches pretty close to what Kathleen shared, maybe off by a couple years in those ranges. But if you want me to provide those, I can do that.
You know, one possibility, Elaine, might be to have another column for notes. And in notes, what you said is pretty relevant. And, you know, if you used 80% and say this is typically a threshold above which, you know, reporting needs to occur and remedial action needs to be taken per accounting rule XYZ or something like that, because that would be, actually, if that's really true, like in Jody's case, that would help make a case for you too, right, Jody?
Right.
And Kathleen, I'm trying to remember, a couple of you had other comments along the way. It seems like you have these percentages, and you might want to note that these percentages could, you know, vary from utility to utility, but and then also having that frequency might be just the other aspect to include here. Which is optional for some, but it's an interesting column.
Yeah, so I think somebody said it. It depends on what data you have.
Yeah.
So if you have the data to generate the percentages,
right,
that's the best. That's the most accurate, the most meaningful, probably.
Yeah.
But if you're really doing, sometimes we'll do a risk where you just get a bunch of people in the room and you're trying to go through 200 risks in a half an hour or something.
Right.
And people get really wrapped around the axle, whether it's 50% or 55% or 45%. Right. Yeah. If there's no data to really drive that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could, in a note, say the actual scoring could vary in terms of qualitative versus quantitative, kind of analysis based on the data that you have, or something like that, in response to Kathleen's.
Yeah. Having in mind that typically for enterprise risk management, which is a consolidated view of risks across the board, or risks that are in your horizon, not based upon data, that might be tricky. But we can add this note because, again, risk management is, you can do it at every level in a company. So if you're using it for engineering, or using it for asset management, or using it for enterprise, you kind of cherry pick whatever is applicable or not.
Yeah. So you're saying that for enterprise risk management, it tends to be more qualitative, but for asset management, engineering, and other risk management, it can be more quantitative and use data analysis to help formulate the probability.
There's Jessica shared something in the chat line on what they used.
Yeah, so we could stick that in.
Yeah, it's just a copy of ours. It looks very similar to what we already have here.
Okay.
It's interesting, Jessica, you also have the 90% on the high.
Yep. Ours is really close to yours. So.
Okay. All right. So do we agree that basically we will keep for that purpose Jody's threshold, and I'll add a note also. Threshold can be tailored to organizations. To organizations specifics, whatever.
Sure.
Okay.
Did you use the 90%, or did you want to use the 80%? You were kind of arguing for 80% threshold for 5.
Yeah, for WSSC water, I'll definitely keep my threshold, but for the purpose of companies who do not have this, we can keep Jody's threshold, but I will put the note that 80% is typically considered for those accounting rules. So yeah, that makes sense.
I think I'd like to have a little more discussion with the group on that 80%, because I think, how do you really use your risk management tools, and if you use them for putting in allowances or having contingency funding or communicating or what have you. I find that super interesting, that 80%, because that's probably a good practice. That.
Yeah.
Jody,
yeah.
Other question I'd like the group to talk a little bit more about is the likely, because we have, or the possible. Kind of, where is the fat part of the curve? Is it in, because I think Jody had 11 to 20%, and you have 10 to 50, to 20 to 90 versus 50 to 80. Kind of, which would you? And I guess, one of the things that I've done in the past is if we do a risk register and we have a lot of really high risks, we kind of go back and reset the thresholds.
It's the rationale for the possible. I've seen it defined as 10 to 20% slightly like Jody, 10, 30%, 10, 40%. When you put risk management aside, but if you ask a friend, are you coming over to have dinner with us tonight? And if he answers you, it's possible. In the collective inconscient, it means there's a good chance, but not sure. So something around like 50%, right? So that's how this idea drove. I've taken a trivial example here, but what does it mean for somebody who's not in risk management when you're talking in our common language? What does it mean it's possible? Maybe yes, maybe no. So meaning roughly 50%. So that was the kind of cutoff for me. If you see what I mean.
That makes sense, because likely 21% seems kind of low for likely.
That's my sense also, but but again, Jody suggests a kind of a broad range, and is likely. And when you say to somebody, same thing, yeah, I'm likely to come with you to the movie to this weekend, for example, it means that you have a very good chance above 50% that this person is going to come. There's still a chance that he or she doesn't come, but in your conscience, it means anything between 50 and 80%. That's my rationale. When I extract myself or try to extract myself from the pure risk management kind of best practices and setup, when you talk to people, like, for example, when I facilitate a risk workshop, I never talk to people about percentages. I drill down after, if needed, into the percentages. But I say, well, what chance do you see that this risk materializes? Do you see there's a good chance for it? Do you see, how would you rank it with your own word? And typically speaking, people say, well, yeah, I can see it coming, or yeah, it's likely, or yeah, I would say more than one chance out of two. That's how they would react. And then you translate it with your matrix. So that was my rationale. The good thing, though, that Judy has in his threshold here is he has a wide range. I would say the kind of downside to that is that outside assets, but in general, most of those risks will fall into that. Because, I mean, besides the black swans and everything, but a good portion of the risks at an enterprise level that we are experiencing are really in this range of probability. So it means that then it would make it probably more difficult to prioritize. Of course, you still have the severity, but and then when you go, or you would go into the quantitative, same thing. When you have a high probability and when you have a high severity in a dollar value, of course, when you run, for example, the Monte Carlo simulation, your numbers are going to be super high because all your risk would fall into that bucket, if you will. But
yeah, I think just a couple points of clarification for what are we trying to recommend one scale here? And so and that's great. And you don't have to, you're not hurting my feelings. This was our first attempt at developing the numbers, and I do realize that the 20 to 90 is a huge bucket, and we're going to have difficulty because a lot of our assets are going to fall into that, or a lot of our events are going to fall into that. I like your explanation of that 50% being the cutoff between possible and likely. And I can even I like the discussion about the 80% as well. So I'm just throwing mine out there as this is what we have. Most likely, whatever we come up with as a group here, I'm probably going to work to modify, my strategy moving forward. So my feelings aren't hurt if we use yours. I do like the idea of having some other means to categorize these if we don't have probabilities, and so we can talk about those years to include potentially.
So how about we suggest, because I like your rare 2%, same thing in the conscience, I would say instinctively, rare is rare. 5% is almost not so rare, if you see what I mean.
Right.
So we could suggest for very unlikely, less than 2% or less than once in 50 years or cumulative causes, right? We could really put those three strings, right, and basically when you have the and or, you can basically adjust it the way you want. For the unlikely, we could then go from 2% to 10%, which is your matrix, Jody.
Yes.
Or once every 10 to 50 years. If everybody agrees with that, then we could go possible 10-50%, or once every 5 to 10 years, or standalone event. Likely then we could go 50-80%, or once every 1 to 5 years, and very likely then above 80%, or at least once every 1 to 2 years, or as happened before.
I like it.
Beautiful.
Kathleen or Jessica?
Yep.
I think that's good.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So just highlighting what we said. I will write it properly after. And okay. Right. And those ones. All right.
Perfect.
Sounds a plan. All right. Okay. So now the impact definition. So again, this is what we have at WSSC Water. I understand Jody as health separate from safety, separate from security, separate from environment, or something along those lines. Reputation, you call it, I guess, media exposure, or something along this line. You might have some different threshold for cost. So can we kind of look into that?
I had one just kind of reaction, and maybe I'm too loose with my money, but the cost impacts like a 10 or a 5 to 10% cost impact, like on the number 4, the high, seems less of an impact than the health, safety, security, you know, and it's kind of always that challenge when you're matching money with health and safety. You know,
Okay.
the severe injury seems to be more significant than the 5 to 10% cost. And same thing with schedule. I mean, 5 to 10% of a schedule is like a month in a year.
Okay, so maybe what I just want to be precise here. The way we use it is and or. So if you have 2 events, 2 consequences, Kathleen, we pick the worst one. Okay, and it can also be a cumulative example. You have a cost impact of 1 to 3%. And you have a schedule impact of 3 to 5%, you may be somewhere in the eye because of the cumulative impact on that risk. Okay. So just wanted to keep this in mind. It's and or for each of them. You have a cost impact and or a schedule impact and or a reputational impact and or blah, 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 blah. But
Jessica has to jump off, and she shared something. Maybe she wants to briefly cover, you know, her items before jumping off?
Sure. Jessica?
You're on mute, Jessica.
Sorry. This is, again, what we used for our risk and resiliency assessment. So it's going to be very asset focused, what you see in the chat box. But I just wanted to go ahead and share what we had for impact. So we have a 1 through 5 scale, just like you, different terms for the descriptions. And then again, the definitions are going to be focused on asset failure. So we've got those kind of tied into there. But I'm going to have to jump off, but I wanted to throw that copy in there just in case it's helpful for the discussion.
Okay. Okay, I'll try to locate it. Thank you very much, Jessica, because I can't see it now on the. I can't see it now, but okay. So, Cielo, I think you are not muted.
Sounds like a birthday party.
Yeah, Cello needs to, yeah, I'll ping him.
Okay.
I think you can mute him.
So, yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
There.
So what would you suggest, Kathleen, for example? So you mentioned that for you, for example, the 4, there's a kind of imbalance in between the cost and schedule impact and the severe injury. You were mentioning that the health safety box looked more dramatic than the cost or schedule impact, correct?
Yes. So I don't think it's very significant as you're ranking your risks. The challenge would be if you end up with a lot of high risks that are driven by cost and they look to be equivalent to the ones that are driven by injury.
It depends on actually on your project. If you have a $1 billion project and you have a 10% cost impact on the risk. Yeah.
Yes. Very good point. Yep. Because it's actually the other way around as well, right? If you have one person get hurt on a $1 million project, and you get one person get hurt on a $1 billion project, the injury is very significant. It's almost equivalent significance on both.
Yeah.
Whereas the cost, the percentages will have a different impact. So I don't know that we need to change the actual numbers here. It's just something to consider when you look at the total highest risks.
And when we came up with our matrix, a lot of discussion went in the alignment of what is a 4, like, what is high?
Yeah.
What do we consider high? And it's not a 1% or 5% because that's like you said, dependent on the project. High might be, we think high is over $1 million or whatever that dollar threshold is, and that can align to, an injury, and we feel that it's on the same level, the same feeling of what high consequence is. So that's what I would suggest. We try to ensure alignment across our individual categories so they all feel the same. And maybe it's business specific or organization specific, because for GLWA it might be over $1 million. For someone else it might be $50,000. And so it's hard to draw that alignment. But and we also tried to start at the level 4 to hone in on what those, you call it high, we call it major. What are those major issues? What's the financial impact? What would be a major issue from we call it public impact? What's a major issue related to health and safety? And that we use to calibrate our scale so we know we can easily jump to 5 and take a a 4 plus 1, whatever that value is for each category, and then we can back into what we feel is a 3, a 2, and a 1.
Yeah.
These percentages, I think Kathleen made the comment earlier that they may seem a little low, but my question is, well, cost, it's a percentage of what? Because it's not always projects, it could be regulatory impact, it could be, basically community, permitting, or extra costs or something. But if you could use dollars, which a lot of utilities do, but if you use percentages, do these need to be adjusted up a little, at least when you get to the massive, because it could be 50% or 100%, or, there could be huge impacts.
Yeah. We had a side discussion a few weeks ago with Kathleen on this point. And of course, I don't mind, same thing, putting whatever percent or absolute value 1 million. The only problem is that in our utilities, we are managing projects that are sometimes $5,000 and sometimes several hundred of $1 million. So if you put in terms of cost impact, a 5, let's say $1 million, that might be like killing the project that is only $5,000, meaning that it will never be in that box. Still, there might be a big risk for that project that could kill the project. That's my concern with absolute value. And the other way around, if you put a threshold of $1 million in 5 and you have a project of $300 million US, $1 million is still $1 million. So, but it's not really, it doesn't keep the focus. So that's where I have a problem. I mean, when we talk about a matrix that is going to be used at the enterprise level, except again for OSHA reporting purposes, engineering, ALARP, FMECA, etc., but that is going to be used for at an enterprise level. Because with an absolute value, unless your company specifically is dealing only with project between $10,000 and $50,000 period, and that's really what's happening, then of course you can have some absolute value. But otherwise, it's for the reasons I've mentioned, it's
But like you said, if you have a project that's $5,000 and you blow that project scope by 100%, theoretically, that may not be that much of an impact to the organization. I'm looking at, you're talking about enterprise risk. So in my mind, I look at it as what's a consequence of that particular, what's a consequence of increasing the cost by $5,000? For the organization, it's probably not that much of a consequence for the organizational risk. Whereas if you did have a $300 million project and you blew it by $1 million, that may impact customer charges. That may impact bonding and capital needs. And it has a higher level of consequence of that event happening. So I hear you that, it may not, that project, then if you blew it by 100% when it was at a $5,000 level, it may not, that category may be low for it, but it may have a serious deadly injury or, unrecoverable natural disaster. It may have some other thing that is causing that risk to be higher that isn't financial focused. It's not, I don't believe it's this plus this plus this plus this that gets you the overall risk. It might be just one of those categories. Mm-hmm. If you hit a 5, it's a 5. I don't care. So just my 2 cents.
No, that's fine. Again, the purpose is that a matrix is used across the board and can be used across the board, meaning at a department level to do some risk management, at a division level, at a project level, and at an enterprise level. So we could easily conceive to do as we did for the probability and having some percentages or absolute value. And we can do that. I don't mind. I don't mind. So what would you suggest, for example, very low cost impact in terms of absolute value?
So I don't know. I know you want to jump into that. This one's a lot harder than the probability of failure discussion. But one thing I wanted to address when we talk about risks, and I think I mentioned this last time, we're looking at this from an enterprise risk standpoint. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at the highest level of each of our organizations. Mm-hmm. We are aware that while the framework we're trying to set up is good for the organization, it may need to be, and we have done this when we're going through our asset management planning, we go into each one of these and say, okay, nothing that happens in our, let's say, our systems control area is going to impact customer budgets by greater than 2%. So we're going to have to realign with our systems control and what we think is a 4 now in that particular area. Like, so that process then may have its own criteria that says what a 4 is on public impact or what a 4 is on financial services. So that's how we've tried to model it, because you can't use an enterprise risk matrix like this. I mean, I find it very hard to use an enterprise risk matrix like this and get a spread of consequence of failure when you start looking at assets or you start looking at projects. Does that make sense?
For assets, following you. The same for health. Again, the threshold for OSHA are different, or when you take the engineering standards by design, you have to use certain probability of failure and blah, blah, blah. Because here we are talking about things. But when you go beyond those 3 activities I've just mentioned, all the rest can use this matrix. And again, it's this matrix or this type of matrix where, for example, you talk about COVID, the financial impact of COVID. You don't have any historical data here. You don't have, it's not a consequence of failure, but you have a probability that COVID economic impact on your organization will be probability, whatever, right? And the consequence on your organization can be financial, so cost impact, loss of revenues, loss of revenues, or for example, can have also a schedule impact. Example, people are working, teleworking, not everybody is there, so there are some tasks that might be delayed, that may create some backlog, blah, 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 blah. May have some reputational impact because, I don't know, maybe there's customer service might be altered, else, obviously. IT impact because everybody now is teleworking, so you might have a surcharge on the networks. I'm just picking things here randomly for the discussion. So I would say the thought in the impact, disregarding the subject, can still be happening with a matrix like that. I mean, again, not for assets or engineering or OSHA, as I mentioned, but for all the rest, you can use, so of course your threshold can be different, and you can even have some more categories. but the discussion can happen around a kind of matrix like that for the consequences.
So Kathleen, and I would just, Jody, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I heard you say, and I have two things, but the first was, Jody, I thought I heard him say, well, there's enterprise risk, and we're coming up with something for that, which is great. But then if you apply it to projects or operations or something that you may want to kind of tweak these scales, and so maybe that's just something that is stated, if that's what you were saying, Jody. And then the other thing, you've talked a little bit about, is there another category that should be added, like workforce or something like that? In other words, are you able to implement, are there impacts, risks of not having the resources, the workforce, the skills, all of that, to be able to address the risk? And so I'm just throwing that out there because we're dealing with all these people side things as well, and just wondering what your opinion on that is. Maybe it's deals with mitigations and other stages, but just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, if we want it to be very simple, and many companies have only what is in white here. You don't have anything else. Why? Because
everything has a number. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I've debated for many years. And I've always refused to put a number of somebody who has an incident or an accident. That bothers me very deeply. However, from a bottom line viewpoint for an organization, if there's an incident or an accident, it goes into workman comp, it goes into, so at the end of the day, money, right? So we could have only that column, cost, right? Now, going back to your first point, Scott, and to what Jody was saying. Again, this matrix, or this kind of matrix, you can use it across the board for a company, either on a project or at an enterprise level. Why? If you look at a project, and even if you have some absolute value here, right? You make your risk management for your project, and you say my project exposure in terms of cost is $10 million US, okay? For example, okay? That's my consequence. At an enterprise level, or 2%, okay? At an enterprise level, it would be the entire portfolio of project and the cumulative quantified risk impact that will be there, right? So you may have, let's say, 2 projects that have a moderate impact, okay, for each of those. But the cumulative of those 2 projects might trigger at an enterprise level a much bigger financial risk beyond moderate for the organization at large. So you can really see it at those 2 levels without any contradiction in that. And again, I'm fully happy if for your organization, you'd rather have some financial threshold in absolute value than percentages. We can put either or. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, as long as you guys, you recognize your organization, or you recognize, you believe it can be useful for every organization, that works for me.
So you could do that, like you're saying, the either or, and maybe it's just, and we have 10 minutes left, and there's a comment Cello wanted me to make, in his absence before we depart, but you're suggesting we have percentages. There's maybe some talk about increasing or changing or modifying those percentages, and then putting in dollar thresholds, on the or. And I don't know who's using what, but maybe people want to give some, say what you would be using for very low, moderate, and so forth.
I have a clarifying question on the percentages. So for the projects, I think, this stuff is very, very straightforward. You have a project cost, you have a project schedule. Mm-hmm. But at the enterprise level, and Helene, right, you had mentioned, for example, revenue reduction. That's what we're facing right now with the COVID situation. Mm-hmm. So is the percent that the revenues are down, or is the percent impact on?
Yeah,
something
that's right.
Else?
Well,
it would be huge, actually, and it is huge in a lot of organizations. Jody?
Yeah. It would be what is the risk? The revenue loss in this case is a consequence. So what would be the risk? Let's imagine the risk that increasing number of delinquent accounts. People cannot pay their bill, right? Probability 80%. Consequence. According to the area we serve, the number of accounts that we have, the history that we have, the unemployment rate, you name it, right? Mm-hmm. We will look at what is the order of magnitude we see of accounts that are not going to be able to pay their bill within the next 6 months. That's just theoretical what I'm saying, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's just an example I'm picking for the conversation. Let's put it this way. And maybe
uncollectible accounts that are going to need to be written off, and there's utilities where it's 10% of their revenues.
Exactly. So here you would say, okay, within the next 6 months, I think maybe there's out of my portfolio, there's maybe 10% of accounts that are going to be delayed, but they are going to be delayed. So it's not going to be an impairment in that 6 months time frame. But amongst those accounts, there's maybe like 3% of those that I will never be able to collect, or if I was launching a collection process, it would cost me more money than the dollar value on those accounts, so it doesn't make sense, right? So that's the kind of thought that you are discussing. And in this case, well, yeah, we are talking about a specific consequence, but here you would say in my matrix, between 5 and 10%. So yeah, I would say.
So here's my question though. So 5 and 10% revenue reduction over 6 months or over 1 year, that's another whole question, is
so
$50 million. Mm-hmm. 10% of a $5 million project is $5 million. So are those percentages, is that how you're looking at cost percentages, just the percent of whatever the cost thing that you're measuring, or is there, because that goes back to the dollar threshold, right? If it's $5 million, it would be 10% of one thing, but 5% of another thing.
Here, actually, when you look at the revenue, you really look, I may lost $5 million because you are going to look at your delinquent account, and those $5 million versus your total revenue for DC Water would correspond to 5, 3, 10%. I don't know how it is.
Kathleen, I think we need to, maybe the next meeting, we need to basically delve into this more. I would say, because I'm dealing with a bunch of utilities, is that they're looking at laying off, 10% of their workforce because they don't have the revenues to pay them. And they're looking at reductions on those uncollectibles, not of 3%, but like of 10% or 14% that are never going to be collected, plus these affordability guidelines are needing to subsidize, basically rates for these people. So, they're right in COVID, it's pretty severe, but maybe, I don't know, Kathleen, what you think, but good discussion. And as Jody said, there's a lot more to discuss in this aspect. Maybe we cover that. I just wanted to, and just quickly, what Cello wanted me to say was, ultimately what we're looking for, just looking ahead also, is being able to document a process. And Mike's on the phone, and we want to make sure that basically what we come up with, we can document in, the business process as a kind of a deliverable that we can use to share also. And then looking forward, maybe a couple months from now, having a workshop where this good information can be shared more broadly to the rest of the, the project participants. So I'll stop there and go ahead.
Jody, yeah.
Yeah, you touched on it when you talked about, when I was originally thinking about percentages, I was thinking about, you're evaluating each particular incident based upon like a project, how much overage is the percentage of the overage of the existing project. But when you talked just now, you were talking about, related to the overall budget, right? And if you have to start with and maybe that's where I wasn't hearing you correctly in the beginning, you have to have a starting point which you're basing all your percentages on.
Yep.
So if you're going to be comparing whatever consequences to a budget, then yes, you can do it. The $5,000 project increased by 1,000 is a small percentage of your overall budget. So I'm hearing that now. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. And it's kind of, so that brings me to my consequence. We call it financial impact. And all of mine is related to really the budget impact. A number one for me is, hey, if this event occurs, we can handle it within the existing resources that we have. A number two is, yes, if this event occurs, we're going to have to make some budget modifications, but we're not going to have to increase charges. Number three might be, it's going to require unbudgeted use of our reserves. And number four, we get into increasing charges to customers. And so if I didn't catch that in the beginning, but you have to have the same,
baseline.
The same baseline that you're comparing your percentage to, and I could agree to that.
And risks, and thank you for that, Jody. Risk is, in its definition, an uncertain event. Should it occur, would have an impact on the objective. So yes, you are always comparing vis-a-vis your objective. So your objective is your budget, is your forecast, is your, you name it. But that you have to be very clear about your objective, because this is from the baseline from which you are measuring, indeed.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Jody,
so I think in that case with the financial impact, I mean, you can incorporate the wording that we have with your percentage and see what that really, how that aligns, similar to what we just did in the likelihood of failure, because the wording may give it another, it could be 1% to 5%, or the event can be addressed by available budget resources.
Yeah. No problem. We'll continue working on this after the holidays.
Yeah.
So Jody, you could furnish those quick definitions that you just rattled off, and then maybe that would help set up the conversation for next time, you think, Helene? Because we're dealing with the percentages and as well as kind of what that means, and that would be useful, and then we could continue it the discussion next time.
Yeah.
The other thing I think would be useful, because I also missed what Jody just pointed out. What number do you start with?
That's the, you have to be clear on the number you're starting with. If you're starting with a project, you're talking about a project, the budget for your project is your objective. If you are talking about enterprise level, it will be probably the revenues that you have communicated to your elected officials, for example. So you have to be very clear to what is your baseline. And again, that's the beauty of it, is that you can adjust it for whatever topic it is. Project with its budget, tender with its forecast, blah, 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 blah. But we are going to leave it here because we are over time.
Okay.
I wish you all very happy holiday season, and we'll see each other in January. And thank you very